my name is Taylor Dubyna, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on the Ukrainian language. And I chose to do a presentation on the Ukrainian language because I'm partly Ukrainian, and just thought it'd be neat to look a little deeper into what it has to offer, what's inside the language. And so next we're going to talk about some of the historical backgrounds about the language. Alright, so we're going to talk about the little bit of a historical background of Ukraine. So Ukraine became an independent nation in 1991, and before that it was mostly just an amalgamation of different states and small tribes and things that sort of made up a whole of Ukraine. But anyways, in 1991 they gained independence from the USSR, and so you think of like Germany and Italy, they were sort of the same way. They were sort of like different independent states and cultures before like the 1800s or so. But so when a long time ago, so I'm going to start with like the Greeks. They established outposts maybe around the 6th or 7th centuries. And so they came into contact with the ethnic people that were there, the native people. And they were mostly Iranian peoples. You have the Sumerians, the Scythians, and there was also the Sarmatians. But as you proceed through time, you have different other tribes that came in, conquered, and displaced the people that were previously settled there. So you have the Goths coming in at around 200 AD. Excuse me. And then you have the Huns that came in later, and maybe about 175 years later, and they, came in and again just wiped out the Goths. But you have other cultures that came in: the Bulgars, the Avars, the Turkic Khazars, the Magyars, the Pechenegs, the Cumans, and they all came maybe later, somewhere around the 11th century AD. But as you can imagine, by this time there's only just a small Greek presence left. So there was a settlement called Chersonesus, and it was surviving with help from the Byzantine Empire. And you might remember that the Byzantine Empire was sort of the eastern half of the Roman Empire after its fall. So anyways, this brings us to Slavic tribes that came in, and excuse me. So they came in and they sort of raided. They were like, Vikings, European Vikings, and they came in, raided the area, just sort of like they did with Britain, and they established a fort called Kiev, and that became the capital of Ukraine, which is now Kiev, or however you pronounce it. So that's a little historical background of Ukraine. I'm sure you could go into a lot more detail, but I just thought I'd do something short. So next we're going to talk about different words that the Ukrainians have borrowed from the countries that surround them and from other languages around the world, like our own language, English. Alright, so this slide is titled Interaction with Surrounding Countries. And for each slide I've sort of put the same title in Ukrainian just because I thought it'd be fun to have sort of a comparison where you can look at the two. So I'll read it in Ukrainian. It says Взаимодія отоцюються країнами. Anyway, so and that all means somehow interaction with surrounding countries. And most countries, most languages rather, if not all, borrow languages from each other when they come in contact with each other. You're almost definitely gonna not find a language that hasn't borrowed from another language, a surrounding language. And so Ukrainian isn't any different. It's basically, it shares about 84% of its words with Belarusian, and it's borrowed from Polish, from Bulgarian, from German, English, Dutch, Italian, Hungarian, Turkish, Arabic even, that's pretty far, Chinese, and even Indonesian. So it's borrowed from quite a few different languages. So according to a website called almaschool.com.ua, Ukrainian was formed rather largely through borrowing and exchanging words with various other languages. So I think it's, that's just one source, so I don't know how much weight is in my statement, but I think it's fair enough to say that Ukrainian has borrowed quite a few, words, quite a hefty amount of words from other languages. But compared to English, English has got it beat, English is borrowed like tons of words. I mean, it's always been doing that. And there's a lexicographer called Corey Stamper, and he estimates that nearly 80% of English is borrowed from other languages. So then the question is asked, are there any words from Ukrainian in English? So me, with my family that's somewhat Ukrainian, we had different meals that were Ukrainian based, and I can remember eating pierogies, which are like little bread dumplings filled with mashed potatoes, and they taste really good. They're really tasty. You eat them with like sour cream and maybe some other things. But then other food items, you have like borscht, which is like a beet soup, and it's red and it has dill in it, and it tastes really good. So then you have words like Cossack, which is like, I guess, a Ukrainian, free person that's not a slave who, goes out in the wild and makes his life out in the wild. And then you have the word steppe, which is like a word describing terrain, like flat with no trees, and sort of like maybe out west, I would imagine, is what I think. So yeah, so that is that's sort of just the slide that we went over real quick on interaction with surrounding countries. And so next we're going to talk about Ukrainian phonology, and yeah. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Ukrainian phonology. So I have my slide here. It says Ukrainska Phonologia. And so let me go to the next slide. Alright, so right here, I guess right now you're going to be able to see a slide here. And I think it's sort of neat just to look at the alphabets of different languages when you're looking into them, sort of get an idea of how they work, and just be able to, to read the words yourselves. That's something that's really valuable. So on the top, you can see the word, and below it, it's inscribed in IPA letters. And so you have the first word, which is elektrika, and that means electricity. And you can sort of see on the alphabet, excuse me, you can see on the alphabet sort of how to pronounce everything if you're curious to try yourself. So the second word, you have parasolika, which is a parasol. If you've ever heard the old English word, means an umbrella. Probably you've never used that word before, but there are some people that use, or at a certain time, when people use that all the time. So the next word is velociped, and this is sort of an interesting word. You think of velocity. Velocity means speed, and then you have the word ped, which is like sort of a Greek or Latin root, which means foot. So you have like quick foot or speed foot, and that's your word for bicycle. You move faster maybe than a foot, move faster by foot, by riding on a bicycle. Sort of interesting. So the next word that we have is journal, and it's just the same as what you hear in English. It's journal. It's the thing you might write, entries in every day. So then the next word is fructe, and it might sound a little bit strange at first, but fructe, if you've ever heard of like fructose is the sugar that you get from fruit, and so fructe means fruit. And so then I have another word, is episcop. I don't know if you've ever heard the word Episcopal Church or something like that. That's a word that just means bishop in Ukrainian. So this is something I didn't necessarily know about the Episcopalian Church or the Episcop or whatever, however it's called. But maybe the word for that church just means bishop. Maybe that's where the word originally came from. And then the last word that we have is word for plow. And this was in the textbook. It was pretty remarkable when I saw it. I thought it was neat that it was almost, the same as in English. And of course, all these examples that we have here are mostly the same as in English. But there's tons of words, most of Ukrainian isn't like English. So this is different than most. But anyway, so that word is plu. And it just means a plow. And I thought that was sort of neat. That was interesting in its own right. So it's really interesting to note the similarities between the Greek and Hebrew alphabets. Ukrainian has borrowed, never mind, sorry. So Ukrainian originally got its alphabet from Cyril, and I think the other person that helped develop the alphabet was Methodius or somebody like that. It was Cyril and somebody with a M. And so the alphabet is very much a Greek Hellenistic alphabet. And if you look at it, if you have any familiarity with the Greek alphabet, it's quite similar, very similar indeed. And so maybe I'll put on the screen sort of a comparison of the two alphabets. But you can see that the alpha is the same, the A. You can see that maybe the V, or what in Ukrainian is of a sound, is the same. It's like the beta. And then you even have the same as the gamma. You have the line up with the line over that makes sort of a 90-degree angle. So that's sort of interesting. And if you just look around, there's going to be different ones that are the same. You have like phi. That one's sort of the same. Excuse me. And you can notice down at the bottom, there's probably some letters that you've never seen before. They're not going to look anything like what you're used to. But there is a Greek alphabet, which is, I think, the Alexandria alphabet, or version of the Greek alphabet, which is more of is the Coptic alphabet, which is sort of like an Egyptian version of the Greek alphabet. And it's really neat. I didn't know this before until recently, but they actually have some letters that are similar to that, similar to the last, row and a half, or not row and a half, but like, where you have the three-pronged letters and the like the backwards R and those kind of things. But anyways, so if you look at the Hebrew alphabet, or actually it's not an alphabet, it's an abjad. If you look at the Hebrew abjad, it's even got some letters that look similar to Ukrainian. So in particular, you have the sh sound, you have the Hebrew sheen, and that's very similar to the sh letter here in Ukrainian. So that's sort of an interesting comparison and sort of neat to look at. And then Hebrew, it's just really amazing. Hebrew has a lot of, the abjad has a lot of similarities to the Greek alphabet. So if you ever get the time, maybe I'll put that on the screen as well. But if you get the time, you can maybe look into it. There is a really neat video that I watched that sort of shows these connections, and maybe I'll post that as well. But anyways, so that's all I have for this slide. On the next slide, we have the we have the phonological chart for Ukrainian. And it sure shows, the glottal fricative there, which is in the plow, the word plow. It's the sort of sound, the one you make in the back of your throat. And then you have the velar fricative. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is in German, and words like Bach and I don't know what's another good one, like Buch or Bucherei. Bucherei is a library. And it's interesting because it sounds like, if you were to put it in English, it's like just like saying a bookery. Just like you have a bakery, which is where you bake things, you have a bookery, which is where you store books. And so that's their word for library. And then another word is auch. You have the word which means also, auch schon. And then you have mich, the word for me. That's another word, good example of the velar fricative. And so then you have velar stops. You have k, g in Ukrainian. You have post-alveolar fricatives sh and zh. And then you have post-alveolar, not stops, post-alveolar fricatives sh and sh and zh. And then you have post-alveolar affricates, which are the ch and j sounds. And so there's some different things. There's the ma, there's the n, the m and n, there's the p, b, the t, d. They have a different word or a different letter, which is the ts sound, the ts sound. And I don't know, you can sort of study over if you want. There's a lot more. Oh, another one to maybe point out is the trill. You have the r sound in Ukrainian. But I'm not very good at putting that into a word, so don't ask me to do that. But then, okay, so after that, we're going to talk about Ukrainian morphology. And so that's what's coming up next. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Ukrainian morphology. And if you're looking at the slide, it says Ukrainska morphologia. Well, that sounds sort of Latin. Morphologia. And so on the picture you can see there's the decorated eggs that the Ukrainian make. And I don't know, I just thought it was a neat picture. It's really pretty. Alright, so now on the slide you can see some examples of morphology in Ukrainian, different additions and inflections of words that change the meaning of the word just by a tiny bit, like a slight change in meaning. But there's the example given of dru. You can see under the example part, dru, which means friend, and then you change the word to nedru, and it means enemy. So you sort of have the negative form, which is ne, or like English, no. A long time ago, Englishmen would say nay, maybe in Parliament when they wanted to vote no on something. Anyway, so then you have, below that you have likar, and that means doctor. But that's the male form of a doctor, so that's your male doctor. Maybe if you have a male doctor when you go to the hospital or something. But then when you say lekarka, that means a female doctor. Adding the K in there, that's an infix. Adding the K in between the R and the A changes it to the female form. And so then we have the word for what you use every day to go to work or to go to school or whatever you use for transportation. It's the word mashina, and it means car. And so when you add that same little K in between, you say mashinka, then it changes to a small car, and that is the diminutive form. That's how they change words into the diminutive form to make it smaller, or I guess maybe in a sense less important. And then below that you have the word testuvati, which means to test, and then you have protestuvati, which means to complete testing. And then below that you have znikati, which means to disappear. And then if you inflect it by saying zniknuti, means to be vanished rather than to disappear. It sounds sort of like the same thing. You have to disappear and then to be vanished, which sort of sounds like the same meaning to me anyways. But anyway, so moving on, below that you have solodki, which means sweet. And then when you inflect it, when you add a prefix of ne, you get ne solodki, which means not sweet. Excuse me. So if you're eating like maybe some Ukrainian pastries, you might, and they didn't taste super great, maybe the cherries had gone sour or something, you might say, oh, ne solodki, that is not sweet, unsweet. Anyways, so the next word that we have, or next example rather, is shumni, which means noisy. And when you add a bez below it, or before it, as a prefix, it changes into bez shumni, which means noiseless. So it's sort of again negating it. You're changing from noisy to noiseless. So sort of like not noisy. The bez maybe is like a not. But anyway, so all this information that I found here, you can access it. It's from a paper, an article that The authors Maria Melimuka, Gabriela Lapesa, Max Kiselu, Sebastian Pado, and so anyway, so these authors, they wrote a paper. It's called Modeling Derivational Morphology in Ukrainian, and it's published by University of Stuttgart, which I think is in Germany. Yeah, because the website is a German website. But anyway, so if you're interested, you can look at that. I mean, I didn't think there was much interesting on there except for this chart. But anyway, so that's all for morphology. Next, we're going to move on to Ukrainian syntax. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Ukrainian syntax. And again, on the slide, I have it in Ukrainian just for fun. It says Ukrainsika or Ukrainsiki syntaxis. And so on the picture, you can sort of see, you can see in the middle, which is actually pierogies, right in the center dish there is pierogies. They're sort of, they're almost like noodle, sort of like a noodle texture, and they're filled with mashed potatoes, and they're really yummy, like I talked about before. And I don't know if you can see above that, there's borscht, and there's some dill down below the green plants that's used a lot in Ukrainian cooking. And dill's pretty good if you like to cook. Maybe try adding some dill into your food. But anyways, so Ukrainian syntax. So on this next slide here, I found this source from ukrainianlanguage.org.uk, and this was actually probably one of the most useful sources. It seemed like it had a lot of information, a lot of good information, and so I don't know, there's just some useful stuff in here. I might read a little bit of it here. Talks about word order, like some languages use SVO, word order, subject, verb, object. Other languages use, a different form, maybe OSV or something. But anyways, so it says the default word order in typical Ukrainian sentences is roughly similar to that of English. However, as they discuss in maybe file 5.2 or so, Ukrainian is more flexible than English and some other languages, since the information about the relationship between the words in a sentence is contained in the endings of nouns, adjectives, etc., rather than in the order of the words in a sentence. So then they give an example here in a sentence. So a typical Ukrainian sentence might go something like this. The changes in legislation should give the opportunity to citizens quickly, simply, and without unnecessary expense to set up various types of community organizations. And they say you can hazard a guess that it could be a translation from Ukrainian. Somehow maybe they just tell by where the adjectives and the endings for nouns and descriptive things are in the word, I guess. Anyways, so then they continue on to say, while the words themselves have been adequately translated, the sentence does not sound natural in English, since the word order of the original has been retained. So anyway, so they just keep on going on. They talk a little bit about different word order, how they sort of are, maybe how you might tell a typical Ukrainian sentence when it's translated into English, because it has the descriptive sort of elements that describe the relationship. They give information about the relationship at the end of a sentence, or somewhere more in the end of your idea and thought. So on our next slide, we have some more examples. I like examples. Seems like one of the best ways to learn a language. So we have, as our first example, we have the sentence Dobry den, Szanovny kolega. And that means good day, respected colleagues. And so I think when reading through these examples, you might get sort of an idea of how sentences are put together. That's sort of the whole idea of syntax, how you naturally put together sentences in a language, and what sounds natural, what sounds okay, and what doesn't sound okay. So the next example that we have the sentence that says, Mi dumayemo что ситуация зайшла в край далеко. And that means we think that the situation has come way too far. And pardon for the phone calling. But, okay, so then the next sentence we have, it says, Zavtra mi z podruhою idemo v kino. And that means tomorrow we with a girlfriend go to the cinema. And so you can sort of see how it sounds weird in English because that's obviously not our syntactic rules. We wouldn't think of that as a well-constructed sentence, so to speak. It's not valid. But in Ukrainian, that's, I guess, just how they naturally order their words to make a sentence. And so that's sort of helpful. You get an idea of how it might sound in Ukrainian, sort of the idea of what to put where, what, words, whether they be nouns or adjectives or verbs or whatever they are, adverbs. And anyway, so yeah, that's all I have for syntax. So yeah, that's basically all I have for my presentation. That basically surmises my presentation. But there's some interesting information if you're interested, just in the Slavic languages rather in general. I don't know. There's a video. I guess I'll put it on here, but it just shows how there's a big similarity between Slavic words, a lot of Slavic words, and Sanskrit. And when I first saw this video, it just blew my mind. I didn't, realize that Sanskrit could have so many connections to the Slavic languages. For those of you that didn't know, Sanskrit, which is a language in India, it's like sort of like the ancient traditional language that was spoken. It has actually a lot of connections to Latin, and so a lot of the numbers are going to be similar to, like, say, the Spanish, which is a Romance language, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of the words in Sanskrit, which is an ancient Indian language, are quite similar to that. And so it's just neat to see similarities between languages. That's something that I really enjoy and think is neat. For instance, there was this word that was really interesting. There's like an old Sanskrit word which is like jungla, and then in the Slavic it's something similar like jungla. That sounds the same, but something similar. I can't remember exactly what it is. And so jungla just means in English like a jungle. It means like a thick, I think it meant in Sanskrit and in the Slavic languages like a thick forest, some sort of thick, deep, what we would call a jungle in English. And that's probably where we got our word for the word jungle. Alright, so I guess this is all I have for my video. And you might be wondering why I keep on switching shirts. I just have a lot of shirts. I didn't know which one I wanted to wear, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll try on a different shirt for, each different slide. But anyways, this wraps up my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And I wish you well in whatever business or field you're going into.